Welcome to Built for This. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. My podcast features captivating conversations with intriguing people who have found purpose in their lives through their career, family, or life experiences, and just why they were built for this. Through the stories that you will hear, I trust that you will be inspired and encouraged to find just what you were built for. So let's get started. And welcome again into the studio for another episode of our show today. Now, this is going to be a treat for me, for our guest today in studio. He's a longtime friend, a great sports TV producer, director, author of this book, 3-2-1, We're on the Air. We'll talk about that a little bit with him. But Bob Steinfeld is my guest. And Bob, thank you for jumping in on the show today.
Well, thank you very much. I was listening to the opening of your show, and it made me think a little bit about Saturday Night Live. Deep thoughts. Go,
yes.
Okay, so I better have some deep thoughts today.
That's right. I'm going to try to get some deep thoughts out of you on this. But I really want to go down your life, your journey. You know, you're a storyteller, obviously, because that's what you do with sports TV producing and directing. But,
that's correct.
You know, you go from we connect in the 80s in Dallas when you're really getting your career going, and now it went worldwide with Olympics, and you're still at it. But let's talk about the beginnings, the starting for you. When did you kind of realize that? I know you in your book you talk about how you loved growing up watching sports on TV and being around it. When did you feel like that? You know what? That's kind of a journey, a path I want to go to be able to tell stories like that.
Well, I knew pretty much when I was in fourth grade what I wanted to do. So I basically designed my career to get a hard English and journalism background. Mm-hmm. And that even when I was going to Arthur Kramer Elementary School in North Dallas, I was able to convince the principal to allow me to go down to Channel 8 and sit in a studio and watch Vern Lundquist prepare for and then do the sportscast. And I would take the city bus. I couldn't believe my parents would actually let me, thinking about it now, when I was just 12 and 11 years old and 13, I would go down to Channel 8. And then also I was able to convince my principal to allow me to go on some field trips with the reporters at Channel 8. So back then, I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I was hoping that would work out, and maybe it did.
Yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. You know, you talk about, and we're going to talk about all the many different stops you've had, and shows and sports events you've produced and directed and been involved with. People can see here on the shot, Emmy Award-Winning producer, director. You've just been involved in so many things, but I love what you said in your book, and I think it's been a part of who you are, that early on you exhibited these terms: dominate where you can. And it seems like you applied that to your craft. And talk a little bit about what that meant to you, just being able to come in, be good and passionate at what you were going to do early on.
I think people that want to become successful in any phase, any career, if you pursue your passion, you'll have a much better chance of getting to the top of your profession. And I'm not saying I'm at the top of my profession, but I was able to achieve success in my mind because it wasn't like so much work. I was enjoying myself, and I really knew the subject that I was working in because, like you said, I watched sports, growing up, back then, even in elementary school and junior high, I would think during when I was in the classroom and it was in math class or history class, I would think to myself, wow, there's a sport event on tonight. I can't wait to watch that tonight. And back then there was not that many sporting events on during the middle of the week because there was just commercial over-the-air stations. No ESPN yet. Yeah,
I want to talk about that because that helped your career as well. But okay, so you get started, but you really start in journalism, maybe on the newspaper side. You go to University of Texas and work on the campus newspaper there, but you get a break with the Dallas Times-Herald. I mean, did you think that perhaps sports writing might be the avenue that you were going to go early on.
Well, yes, sports writing, but also television and radio. And I was doing all that at University of Texas. And, so much in this business, it's not that big of a business. So you've got to kind of make your own breaks, and there's not necessarily the opportunity you're looking for at that particular time, right? Mm-hmm. So I always advise to people, get your foot in the door, and do whatever you can. If there's a company you want to work for, take an entry-level job in the mailroom or if lighting is not necessarily what you want to do or audio, but there's an audio assist or a lighting assist job working for the company you want to work for. Well, maybe you'll get pretty proficient at that. And if you don't go in that part of the business, maybe if your ultimate goal is being an on-air reporter, well, now you're going to understand audio and lighting. And the more you know about more phases of the media business, the better you'll ultimately be and maybe more respected by some of your technicians.
Now, you made yourself a good example of that by just being available and kind of volunteering at some places or for eventually at ABC, and then you get involved in different things. But expand a little bit more about the importance of that, of people that may have aspirations like you have or whatever their life career is, but the importance of being adaptable, being able to take some job that's not necessarily what they want to do, but maybe apply things like being on time and being prepared and doing your homework that gets noticed, and then all of a sudden you've got that opportunity.
Yeah, I actually give that opportunity to people that are looking to advance today. For example, as executive producer of the Dallas Wings, I actually hire students that go to various universities around the North Texas and Texas area to work as volunteer stage managers and have them come into the truck and have them shadow some of our announcers, because it's a way of giving back, but it's also, I look at some of these people and say, well, I was like that. Mm-hmm. I wish I had that opportunity, or, to me, I found some really nice and really good workers. One, for example, went to TCU. Yeah. And she was in the broadcast department. And Mike Martin oversees the journalism and the broadcasting at the Bob Sheeper School of Journalism at TCU. Sure. Who ended up publishing my book, by the way, TCU Press.
Yes, they did.
And no, just a coincidence. But I asked for some recommendation of people that might be good as a roving reporter position. And Alexa Shaw came over and immediately made an impression on me of her natural ability. And I ended up hiring her, and she worked for 2 or 3 seasons for me for the Dallas Wings while she was still going to school at TCU. Well, as soon as she graduated, she ended up getting an agent, Wasserman Agency, big agency. They've just changed their name, by the way. And she got a job immediately in Washington, D.C., and she's still there now, 3 years later, working for Monumental Sports as the Washington Capitals reporter and studio host.
You mentioned your work with the Dallas Wings of the WNBA, and what a growth in that sport. Talk a little bit about your advocacy for the growth of women's sports in America, and how you've helped assist that with the Dallas Wings and their exposure that they're getting in the Dallas-Fort Worth market, but nationally how that league is, and how it's just kind of taking off with some of the superstars that we're seeing come into the league.
I'm going to say this. I actually produced the first season of the WNBA 30 years ago it was ESPN and Lifetime. Mm-hmm. And, there's always been superstar female athletes. Now they're getting their due, with more exposure. I had one friend who said, well, I'm watching women's basketball now because of Caitlin Clark. This is 3 years ago with college. And then they watched her rookie year in the WNBA, and they hadn't watched in years.
Yeah.
And they go, wow, man, I didn't realize, Caitlin Clark is really good. I love it, but there's so many other female athletes that are really great players and athletes. And I said, well, they've been there. Now you're getting ready to, you're seeing them because of that. But, the WNBA has become more competitive, and there are some great female athletes, and Paige Beckers for us.
Yeah.
And more people are appreciating it now, and I have always covered women's sports. Like you said, my first beat at the University of Texas was covering the women's basketball team at University of Texas when they were in the AIAW. Before the NCAA. And my last year at Texas was Jody Conrad's first year at Texas. So
she had a pretty good run.
She had a pretty good run. So I've covered a lot of her and UT games. And maybe coincidentally or not, my commentator, expert analyst on our Dallas Wings games is, former NCAA champion with the Texas Longhorns, Fran Harris.
Yeah.
So that's been great.
And another person, I'm kind of going all over the place here, backtracking, but talk about what your relationship and what Nancy Lieberman has meant to the league, to the advancement of women's sports, and just where it's been elevated, but just because of everything that she's done.
Yeah, and Nancy's been obviously, an advocate for women's sports, and she gives so much back too. Yeah. With, courts, basketball courts built around the country for, an underprivileged, under-resourced areas. She does clinics all over the country. She's, gives a lot back to the community. And I've enjoyed working with her over the years. Her, there's not many people that know more about basketball and strategy. And by the way, she's also won a championship as a head coach,
yes,
too. So not only been a great player, and can still shoot. It's like when it was Nancy Lieberman Day a few years ago, like 2 years ago, and she went on the court after the game and just started shooting baskets with the play and just knocking them down one after the other. You don't necessarily lose your athletic ability. So she's been a really good friend and an advocate.
When you get your career going, I know you do some work with the Dallas Mavericks, but then in San Antonio, you had a long run with a lot of television work for the Spurs there. Talk about some of the relationships you had with those teams, and there were some great teams with some great players like Tim Duncan and others that went through there when you had a chance to tell their stories and enhance that. 23
years producing the San Antonio Spurs, and that's been great. And you pretty much need to drink this San Antonio Spurs Kool-Aid to be able to stay with the team that long. And so understand, how the team operates and, how you present the team on the air and how you establish a relationship with the players, but also like Coach Pop, because Coach Pop was an assistant under Larry Brown when I started with the Spurs back in '89, and what a time! In '89 was David Robinson's rookie year. My first year doing them, and then we got Sean Elliott, and we got Tim Duncan, and we had Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili. So and when you work for the Spurs, you need to understand a few things like relationships with players I briefly mentioned. But, I traveled with the team and, on the plane. And if you happen to go by a certain player, you can talk to him, but you're really not supposed to overly mingle with the players. Let the players sit on the front of the plane and we sit on the back. If you see them in the lobby, that's fine. Or if you're going to interview them, that's one thing. But I lived in Dallas, obviously, but I would fly and meet the team on the road and then stay on the charter the rest of the way. And one time I was flying up to Toronto from Dallas, and I landed, and I arrived at the arena at around 12 o'clock, at then called Air Canada Center.
Yeah.
And, the team was at the shoot around till 1. Well, our call time for production was 1 o'clock. So now I had an hour where I couldn't get in the production truck right away. So I walked down on the court, and the team was doing their shoot around. And their shoot around is, for people don't understand, it's an hour practice that the team has at the arena. They do the scouting report on the Raptors at night, what they're going to run and what, defensively against the Raptors, and then some plays they might specifically use that night. It's also a good way to get the team out of bed, right, and get them focused and stay out of trouble, which is one thing Pat Riley used to say, who started the shoot-arounds. And anyway, so I go sit on the side of the court, and I'm watching them, and they're now about wrapping up. And now Tim Duncan starts walking over towards me, and the Hall of Fame forward. Yeah. And I look to my right, and I see that there's some clothes over there, and I go, wow, that must be his warm-ups or whatever. Well, he's coming towards me, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and I go, okay. I don't know what you're supposed to say. I go, but we're going to have a little talk here or something. And I remember he wasn't feeling that well the game before. So he approaches me, and I look at him, and I go, Tim, how you doing? And he goes, oh, I'm fine. I'm gonna play tonight. And then he looks at me and says, how are you? And I'm thinking, whoa, how am I?
Tim Duncan's asking me.
You can think of it, right? He's asking me. I go, well, Tim, I'm great. I scored 21 points in the JVA yesterday, the Jewish Basketball Association. And he looks at me and says, got to dominate where you can, man.
Ah, that's where that came from.
That's where that came from.
That is priceless. Priceless, very priceless.
Good advice.
Good advice, yes.
Yeah, from Hall of Famer. Yeah.
So it's many stories. I know, you were talking about that. And as a producer, director, many people may not really totally realize what that entails, but we talked about it kind of very briefly at the start, that you're a storyteller. So when you go to the arena or you go to the football field or whatever the venue is you're doing that event, how are you, or how much in advance are you looking for what stories am I going to tell tonight? And how do you do that just on the fly when a story starts developing and you think, oh, that we need to start enhancing that and develop that a little bit more?
You always want to have a plan of what you're going to do going in, right? And it's like, I've used this analogy in a few different ways. You're almost like a doctor in that you have to have a lot of things in your bag, different types of equipment that you might use, but you're not going to use all of them. You could have a lot of prescriptions that you can, prescribe for people, but you only prescribe the ones that apply to that night, right? So you need to go into a show with a bag of stories and things that make sense, but you don't use them all generally. You use some of them, but you will then apply the ones that end up making sense as that game progresses, right? And a lot of times the story is just what's happening on the court because it's a great game. There's a lot of other times when you have to think early in the season, right? When a team like the Dallas Wings are still trying to play together and they're trying to learn how to play together and the game might not be that close. Well, you're going to be developing more stories about some of the individual players that are playing in the game and maybe not talking so much about the score as you are about the players and the team and what's coming up and things. So, and then sometimes things happen during games, not necessarily basketball. We were doing a boxing match for Fox Sports. I produced Sunday Night Fights for like 10 years, and we were in Kansas City, and my one of my commentators, Sean O'Grady, who was a former world champion, was screaming for the referee to stop the fight because one of the boxers, didn't look good, and he got headbutted illegally by his opponent. And now a couple rounds later, he was not looking good, and the referee didn't stop the fight, and he ended up getting punched and went to the ground, and he was unconscious, and they ended up taking them to the hospital. Well, so now we're adjusting. How do we cover that, right? And you also don't want to speculate on things that are going wrong and stuff, but you do need to report and show tastefully what had happened and document it. There's been a lot of instances in sports television where things like that happen. So, there's less serious things like the American Airlines Center leak roofing during a Golden State game. That happened a game I was working at. Or when I was in New Orleans, the same thing happened during a New Orleans Pelicans game. And so you have to alert the studio of what's going on, see if they can help fill. You need to talk to the proper people to get a statement from either the arena or the team and then the league. And then now you're talking to your executive producer and, how we can handle this. And so, you need to be ready to adjust on the fly.
All right. Let's talk about the Emmy Awards here. You won 10 Emmys that people are looking at here.
Yeah.
You had a chance to work at 3 Olympics and produce different shows for that.
Is that what this is?
Is that what that's what that is?
Okay.
That's pretty nice. What was that like, getting the opportunity? And you've gone from working in Dallas, UT, working in Dallas, doing different things, and you get some other ideas. We're going to talk about some of the creative projects you came up with, but now you get a chance to do some different things, and now on the Olympic stage. What was that experience like for you? It's
pretty much the best experience that I had. However, in Barcelona in '92, NBC asked me to produce the official Olympic highlight video and the official Dream Team 1 video. So originally had asked me to produce weightlifting and wrestling.
Well, this is a big change.
Right, and then they changed it because they knew that I had produced Tom House pitching videos and Nolan Ryan's fastball videos. So I had experience of producing videos. And they say, well, we would like you to do that if you're okay with it. Well, it was great. It pretty much took about 6 months of my life to catch up physically and mentally after doing, because I was working 24-hour period trying to get the video done, and that was fun. And then the Dream Team video too, we were doing at the same time.
Wow.
I had 6 edit suites going. They're tearing the International Broadcast Center around because I'm trying to finish it in a week afterwards. And I was literally the last edit bay, and they go, well, that's it. And they just pulled the plug. And I called NBC and said, well, we got the Dream Team video done. I still need a few more days in a week, and I still need to get Bob Costas, who is the narrator of the Olympic highlight video. I still need to get him to voice a few things extra. And they go, well, when you come back to the United States, we'll get edit suite for you in Dallas, and then you'll need to go to St. Louis because that's where Bob is. And we'll get you an audio suite, and you can finish it up there. And so I ended up going to St. Louis, and we're right at the end of voicing over with Bob in the studio because that's where he lives in St. Louis. He goes, I've got go to the St. Louis Cardinals game. They're playing. I'm working the game tonight, so I have to be done by 5 so I can get over there. And so he left, and we had laid down some tracks that we thought would work, and they worked, but not maybe great. It worked, right. So, but at this level, it needs to be perfect. Yeah. So it's about 8:00, and I'm still in the studio. It's supposed to be done by 6 and 8 p.m. And I get a phone call, and they said, "You got a call." I go, "Who is it?" And they go, "Well, I don't know. It sounds like there's baseball in the background." So I pick up the phone. And it's Bob Costas calling me between innings during the game. He goes, I just check in to see if the work I did, you were really happy with it. And I'm thinking to myself, how do I be happy with Bob Costas? No, I wasn't thinking that. I said, I just thought it was so cool that he would call and check. That goes to show what kind of person he is and professional he is. And I said, well, everything's good. I think in the wrestling area and this one other area, we made it work. He goes, well, if it's not perfect, he goes, I can come back, after the game's over. So he did.
Wow.
It's about 10:30. He came back to the studio, and we revoiced it until it was perfect. And then I go, well, that goes to show you what type of professional he is. And then he looks at me and he goes, hey, weren't you supposed to be back in Dallas by this time? And I go, well, yeah, this kind of went a little over. And he goes, well, where are you staying tonight? And I go, well, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I'll call NBC hotline and see if they can get me a hotel in downtown.
Oh, my.
And he goes, no. He goes, why don't you come stay at my house? He goes, it'd be great. We got room. We can talk about the old ABA days because I used to go to Chaparral games growing up in Dallas, and he was the voice of the Spirit of St. Louis and the now defunct ABA team. But then, and I said, no, I can't impose on you and that. He goes, no, I really would love for you. And that, to me, that just showed a lot what kind of person he was. Didn't really know me that great. I'd worked with him for like a month on this, and that he would reach out a hand like that and just be so hospitable just shows, again, his character.
You've worked with so many great broadcast legends, and on the athlete side, one thing I was intrigued and I read in the book, and I think people have no idea when they just think, oh, that sounds like a fun job. You get to show up on, say it's college football, you show up on a Saturday at the stadium and get to see a great game and call the shots for TV. But you laid out in your book, 3, 2, 1, we're on the air, something that, I certainly was aware of, having worked in broadcasting a little bit, but the preparation time that is needed. And you gave a nice day-by-day breakdown of what, if you're producing a game on Saturday, that it really starts on Monday, of all the contacts, all the things you got to reach out and prep. To talk a little bit about the prep work, which I know you stress is if people want to do anything in their life, getting prepared is key. But what that's like getting ready for a Saturday afternoon college football game.
Yeah, well, if you're doing a whole season of games and everything, you're not just preparing necessarily for that one game that week. Yeah. I'm pretty much ahead, like a week ahead, already contacting, sports information directors, media relations directors for the teams, letting them know, what the kickoff time is going to be, trying to get story bars, sidebars, and giving them the names and people on my staff and the announcers and who they're going to be and everything, so we can start a dialogue, between the teams and, and us. So once we get to the week, once we get to like on Monday, we've already established a relationship so we can get coaches' interviews, times set up, and what the main storylines of the games are going to be following the last weekend's games and things. And so I am like, on Monday, I'm recapping what happened over the weekend. And then working on the next week's games, and then we'll have a meeting, a phone call with the network and executives and our staff, our production crew, to go over the last game and give feedback on this or that, and also news and things that we need to get on the game this weekend. Talk about any new production elements, new sponsored elements, new initiatives of the network, and also maybe what, like, the conference that we're in has communicated to the executives, in LA or New York, whatever, network I'm working for. And that's just Monday and Tuesday, right? And now I'm talking to my associate director and stuff. We're talking over packages, video packages that we're going to use in the open, or flashbacks, or, things that need to be edited, what time the edit time is that week, who's going to be editing it, what graphics we need to put on that. Now I'm talking to my associate producer about what, like, specific graphics during the game, full screen graphics, specialty graphics, and I'm even doing that now with the Dallas Wings, and our season starts in May, but we're already working ahead, on things like that. So, and then we'll have a production meeting with our announcers and everything for football, like on Wednesday or Thursday. And then we'll go to the venue, get there the day before, 2 days before, and then we'll sit and meet with the coordinator, the offensive defense coordinator, and also the head coach. And we might do a video session when Brian Baldinger was one of our analysts. You know, he would break down the video with us, and it would help us to, you know, in our preparation of producing the game for you, to understand what offense they're running, what defense, what players they like on their own team, and just some backgrounds on maybe that they don't want the public to know, but it would help for us to know why a certain player is maybe not functioning as the top level because maybe he has a strained hamstring or sore. We'll find all that out behind the scenes. Then we'll go to their walkthrough the day before and maybe talk to some of the players and stuff, you know. And it's the same thing I'm talking to my roving reporter too.
Yeah.
You know, I'm wanting to know, you know, what I want a list of storylines from that person that I can look at, so I know that that person is adept and knowledgeable on a specific player or subject. So if I feel I want to go that direction, or if that reporter is hard selling it, if I know some of the things in advance of that he or she might have prepared, then that helps. And by the way, then we do the game.
That's like an afterthought.
Now we have the game to do.
And I remember I used to always, when I was at KRLD and we were preparing for a Dallas Cowboys game, it was much like that all through the week, getting prepared. I used to always think that, you know, once I got to the game, that was the easy thing to do during the week. I wanted to ask you, you know, you've worked with, like you said, so many networks and on a regular, recurring basis of events and games and different things, but I know that you've been such a lifelong, you know, storyteller, and so you've come up with projects on your own, or you create things on your own. And you think, oh, you know, I wonder if this would be a good show, and pitch it to a network or pitch it to someone to get out there. I know you did Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson pitching video and just different kinds of events. Is that the creativity that you've always had inside you, that if it's not just a game you're working on, but there's always something stirring in the back of your mind, like, I think this might be a good show?
Yeah, or a video. Like the Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson, that was pretty much when, you know, Randy Johnson said that he became a better pitcher is when he worked with Nolan Ryan. And it had happened on the video that we produced with Tom House together. And so what I did is I flew Randy Johnson in from Seattle when he was playing for the Mariners. And then we flew him into Intercontinental Airport, and I picked him up there. Then it was called, now it's Bush. Yeah. And then brought him to Alvin, Texas. And that's where Nolan's from, for those that don't know. And that's where he played high school baseball. And we shot the instructional video at Alvin High School baseball field. Nice. And Nolan was there, and he worked specifically directly with Randy Johnson. You know, there's a picture in my book about that. Yeah. And I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we couldn't even get in the video that was great, but you know, it's still, you know, available. You know, people still buy it like 30 years later. But Randy actually wrote, and I put in the book a little thing, you know, how much he really appreciated Nolan and Tom House working with him, you know, when they didn't have to. So that was an entrepreneurial project. You know, I was interviewed by another podcast a few months ago, and it was a baseball podcast, but it was also a former congressman from Ohio. Mm-hmm. And he was an attorney, and he loved baseball, but he read my book. And in the middle of the podcast, he stopped in and said, listen, everyone listening, he should change the name of the book from 3, 2, 1, we're on the air, to Jump and a Net Will Appear. Mm. And he goes, the reason he said that is because I've taken some chances, entrepreneurial chances. And if you don't take those chances, then, you know, well, if you do, there's a chance that it could be successful. A lot of times maybe they're not. But in this case, I jumped and a net appeared with the Nolan Ryan one. And then another one was Icons of Coaching, which was a series that won 2 Emmy Awards that won a University of North Texas, you know, journalism professor, Dave Barnett, and also a voice of the of the Mean Green.
Yes.
And
long time with the Mavericks as well.
Well, that's where Dave and I worked originally together with the Mavericks in the 80s. And then we worked with the Spurs together.
Right.
And he was instrumental in getting me down to San Antonio. And so we have a love, obviously, of sports. And he had an idea and I had an idea, but, we put it together. I had relationships with like Mike Krzyzewski and some of Lenny Wilkins, some of these other guests that we had on the show. And Fox was great. And from Fox Southwest, Mike Ignacio, executive producer. And I had some contacts of working with Fox with the programming people. And we were able to get it on all of the Fox regional channels. And Dave and I flew all over the country. We even went to L.A. to do a piece on John Wooden icon. And we went to UCLA and we interviewed a lot of famous former Bruin players and coaches. And then we went down to San Diego to interview Bill Walton, and who ended up writing the foreword to my book.
Yes, he did.
But we went to his house in San Diego, and he was great talking about John Wooden. We had some fantastic stories of where we shot it was inside his guest home, which was all made up, had all kinds of Grateful Dead, equipment in there.
He was a
pictures.
huge fan of the Dead.
Right, and so we have pictures in the book of Dave and I, at his home, there at in the studio. He also has a teepee outside as a guest home. Between his home and the actual real guest home, there's a teepee, and inside the teepee, it's actually really like, a place where you can spend the night in there with a bedroom and, other stuff in there. So
Bill Walton.
Yeah, so Bill Walton. When you read the foreword to the book, he wrote it obviously a few years ago before he passed away, and he wrote in that when you read it, you go, "This is Bill Walton." You can really tell his colorful language.
Yeah. Bob, when you started along getting really into your TV producing and directing career, things like the regional TV networks were just kind of coming along and getting their foothold. You were at a time, it seemed like, kind of getting started, still are, but when you were doing it in the 70s, 80s, that it seemed like a wonderful time to be coming up with, like you said, these entrepreneurial projects and pitching networks or pitching any entity that might get. I know you did some stuff for On TV and different things, but it seems like that was a great opportunity. And I'm going to go back to the comment you made about just take a leap and the net will repair, how important that is nowadays for people to still have that kind of courage that you had in just taking a chance.
Yeah, just be persistent. I tell people, just keep trying until they say no. Don't go. But and that's what I did. Back when I was just starting out. In the 70s when I was going to school, and I really wanted to work with ABC Sports. Part of that came about because I wrote a story about why college baseball was not televised, and all the networks wanted copies of my story, and ended up establishing a really good relationship with ABC. And I mentioned to them what my ambition was, and they knew what it was. And, so I ended up, they asked me if I would go to Waco from Austin and work a college as a runner, as a college football game. And it was Bill Yeoman in Houston against Grant Teff and Baylor.
Wow.
And that was my first game as a runner, and I got to meet some great ABC people and went on to have fantastic careers, including Kurt Gowdy Jr. And it's funny because I didn't realize this until a few years ago. I wrote that story on why college baseball was not being televised by the networks, and then not even 10 years later, I'm producing the College World Series for ESPN.
Wow!
So how is that? How is it? Is it a coincidence or? It's divine intervention.
It is.
It's like I was producing their Sunday night college baseball game of the week, and then they got Major League Baseball, and I ended up producing their first ever Major League Baseball game on ESPN. So I write that story of why college baseball is not being televised as much, and then I get that opportunity later on. So
and with
I'm blessed, and I don't take it for granted.
And so speaking of ESPN, I know you took a chance in trying to go to work with them when they were so-called at that time this fledgling new network, and no one really kind of knew what ESPN was all about. What was that? Was that another appearing net jumping out there and taking a leap of faith and saying, let's see what this develops into?
Not really.
No?
I mean, because like I was already at like 27.
Yeah.
I was producing Major League Baseball, the Ranger games,
Yeah,
at that age. And, we had on TV and HSE, subscription television, and then regional sports television in Dallas. And now ESPN's asking me to do some other sports. They asked me to help out on tennis, the WTA.
Oh, yeah.
Tennis as a production assistant. But they knew I was already producing games, and then they knew I'd done baseball. I don't know. It ended up working out.
Yeah.
So, but what I tell people that are trying to get in the business now is that when you get that opportunity, and you inferred this early on, when you get that opportunity, you need to work your hardest and make a good impression on what you're doing, because if you don't, the person that you're working with now, later on, when they get into a hiring position, they're going to remember from a positive standpoint, hey, I remember that person. They were really good. They worked hard. They were aggressive. They were smart. I think they, have a lot of potential. And if you don't do that, the industry is small enough to where and there's so many people that want your job that you may not get that opportunity again with that specific person, right? So, just always try your hardest when you're working in anything you do.
I'm going to be remiss before we end here today if I don't ask you about the Olivia Newton-John section of this book.
Okay.
And, people might wonder, now, what's that doing in a sports television book? So,
well, pretty much, yeah, I was always a Olivia Newton-John fan.
Well, who wasn't?
Right? I remember when I was a freshman, even in high school, I remember. And then, I had an opportunity, like when I was working with the Daily Texan. This is like I said earlier, right? You can be writing sports and everything, but if you're working for that company or whatever, and there's an opportunity in another department, I love, music and besides sports, and I wrote a review on Linda Ronstadt concert. Well, why not then use your press credentials and get into a Linda Ronstadt concert and review her concert in the Dallas Times-Herald? So I did. I mean, in the Daily Texan. So at the University of Texas. So I did that with Linda Ronstadt. Well, now Olivia Newton-John, who I'd loved, was going to be at the Houston Livestock and Rodeo. Well, I asked perhaps the amusement editor if they would like a review of that concert in Houston, and it's her first major concert in the United States. But she was already had some hit songs, and they said, fine, you can go down there, and they pay your transportation, put you up in a hotel. And I wrote the story about it, and and that was great. And then I would go see her concerts afterwards, obviously. And then my wife and I actually went to Las Vegas. I guess it's about like 10 years ago. And we actually went to her show at the Flamingo and met her backstage and stuff, and talked to her. So that was a good experience. So I wrote the review and I put that in the book. I had to, because most of my friends would go, how can you not write a memoir and not have Olivia Newton-John in it? Totally
got to be in there. Again, I'm kind of going back to this right here, 10-time Emmy Award winner from Dallas, Texas, growing up, just a kid who wanted to be in sports. And just a kind of a final word. I know that you express a lot, and it seems to be so apropos for you, Bob, and how you've lived your life about just dominating where you are, being good at what you do, and that seems to be the message that you pass on to others, and you have in the show here today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. And, I really like to get, across the point that, like I started the show, like, if you really love what you're doing, pursue that. And, always try your hardest and give your best effort forth and be prepared and always have a plan B, especially if you're in live television. And, you establish relationships with the people you work with. And that's like athletes say, when they're leaving, UCLA, like the team that won the national championship yesterday, women's UCLA basketball team, is they're going to miss the relationships with the players and the coaches, and you move on, but in this case, I've been lucky to work for the Spurs for 23 and been doing the Dallas Wings. This will be my 10th season, and working with people like Ron Thulin, the play-by-play, and I mentioned Fran Harris earlier, and Dave Marnett I mentioned earlier. So and director Dave Burchett, who's been a guest on this show.
Yes, he has. And
he and I started out together, with the Mavericks in 1980, and he gave me an opportunity to work, starting off doing graphics. I ended up producing the games, and so I'm very grateful for him for helping me, and so I like giving back in that regard as well. So now I have, 2 students from TCU that will be working with me on the Wings games in the next few weeks.
Beautiful. Okay, well, if you're out there, be sure and get this. It's Bob's book, 321. We're on the air. You're going to like it. You're going to talk a little bit. He'll be able to read a little bit more about all the stories we've talked about. And Bob, thanks for being on the show. Keep doing what you're doing. You're a great inspiration to everyone.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And remember to dominate where you can, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Built for This. Be sure to follow Built for This on your favorite listening platform and share it with a friend. Join me on the next episode when I will share entertaining stories of inspiration, encouragement, and purpose-driven experiences. What are you built for? Built for This is produced and recorded by Heart Media DFW.